Hello and welcome to week 9 of PA124. This week we are in chapter 11 and we're talking about more punctuation. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about your discussion question due for this week. Your discussion is, and this follows you everywhere, not just this class, but why is it important to cite other authors' work? So for example, like when you're in a discussion and you're talking about something in another class or in this class, and you reference another site, you reference another author's work, why is it so important that you, as the individual who is taking from that author, cites that author's information? Why is that important? I'd love to hear from you. I'm glad that this is our last discussion. Week 9 is the last discussion. Next week we are in week 12, but then we're also just taking our final exam into week 10. So that'll finish that up. And so if you have any questions about that discussion, let me know and I can help you answer that. Okay, moving on to chapter 11. We are talking about more punctuation. So last week we talked about in chapter 10 the basic punctuation. You're using exclamation, commas, that kind of stuff. Now we're getting into semicolons that helps conjoin things. We're talking about colons. So I wanted to read you, starting in chapter 11, a little bit about what chapter is about. It says, "The notes I had handle not better than many pianists, but the pauses between the notes. That is where the art resides." And I think if you can read aloud and you can really see where the pauses should be and where the punctuation is, that helps you to write. So reading something aloud, I remember when I was taking those tests in high school and we had to take in a huge room, I remember reading aloud some of the sentences so I knew where the commas and the semicolons would go. And so I think as you're going through some of your assignments this week that you just read aloud the sentences and it might be able to help you know where the pauses should go. So for example, let's start with semicolons. They mark strong breaks between separate but closely related thoughts. Semicolons often divide many clauses. Semicolons also may separate items in a series that include commas. Space once after a semicolon. So if you're typing on a typewriter, you don't have to space twice like you do with a period, but with a semicolon it is just once. So there are some here. For example, Bob Miller's house is a colonial salt box, semicolon. Joe Walker's is a log cabin. So two different sentences that can stand on their own, but very similar. So we put a semicolon in it. And then it goes on to talk about independent clauses and transitional expressions, where you can add transitional expressions such as therefore, however, and moreover. So for example, our flight was 2 hours late. I'm on page 178, semicolon, therefore, comma, we missed the connecting flight. So that is not a sentence that can stand on its own. It's not independent. It needs to be a transition right there. So that's when we would use that semicolon. And then we're talking about colons where we're listing something after it. So for example, I'm on page 179 now. Remember the 6 C's of business writing? Courtesy, clarity, conciseness, correctiveness, concreteness, I missed that, and completeness. This is a list of things. So usually after a colon, you would see a list of things. And I think that you space twice. You only space once after a colon. Something I just learned because I was spacing twice when I would type. So space once after a colon, and I love that probably every time I did space twice that my autocorrect would probably correct it. So that's pretty awesome. And then we're going back to quotation marks and using commas and periods and question marks, semicolons and colons all together. They do in this chapter with apostrophes, so making sure what is yours, and yours, if you're looking into that, is used correctly, and then also a hyphen if you're maybe talking about writing out numbers or anything like that. All right, so that looks like the end of that chapter, chapter 11. You do have a summary and an assignment due for this week. Let me know if you have any questions. You guys are doing awesome. I will see you next week where we will talk about chapter 12 and then we'll talk about what's on your final exam. Hope you have a great week and let me know if I can help in any way. Talk to you soon.